Welcome back to A Different Kind of Hex. I'm Ian. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm joined, as always, so far this is 8 times in a row, 100% win streak. I'm joined by my co-host, José. Hello, José.
Hey, Ian. How you doing? Hi, everybody. My name's José. I use he, him pronouns, too. Happy to be here, and really happy to have our special guest on tonight.
That's right. Lurker extraordinaire, friend of the show. You could say our correspondent on the ground. It is Danny. Welcome, Danny.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful to have someone from the community here again with us to talk about our favorite subject.
I have to say that I have a special soft spot for you, Danny, because I think that your very first experience as a player in this community was with me running a game for you, right?
Yes, it was Heart the City Beneath, I believe.
We had a rip-roaring time in that game, if I remember correctly. And I'm very curious to hear from you about your experience in the community since then, and, of course, about any other experiences that you might want to bring up. Because today, we're going to be talking about... On this show, we have covered a lot of sort of theoretical ground, things like the magic circle, bleed, things like this. But today, what we're kind of interested in focusing on is how can you, I'm talking to you, the listener, how can you improve your experience at your own table rather than in this kind of theoretical, platonic dimension, at your own kitchen table or more likely a Zoom call? What can you do to improve your experience?
Yeah, and that's been, I think, a question that's been kind of an undercurrent throughout the entire podcast, because it's definitely a part of what we're up to as a podcast, is thinking about our own experience as players, but also thinking about optimizing it for ourselves, but also for our tables and for our peers. So I think in all of our discussions of bleed or of playing to fail or of character creation, whatever it might be, we've been at some way, at least indirectly, thinking about this question of how do we develop? How do we get better at our craft? Is that too strong a word to use? Maybe we can think about what words we might want to use. Our practice, our hobby, our fun, our creativity, our artistic expression. So many different possibilities of thinking about it. So it's great to now have this time here with Danny to think about that underlying question that's been really kind of guiding us through the months of this first year. We're getting to our first year, aren't we?
Yeah. Yes, it's time that we synthesize all of these disparate parts, resolve the dialectic, if you will. And by way of doing that, Danny, as you well know, the way that we like to start the show is by asking you about your poison. What is, to borrow a phrase, giving you life right now?
One of the things that keeps me coming back to the table over and over and over again is systems in motion, seeing the systems that we're using to play and seeing how our interactions with them and their interactions with us bring about what we create at the table and how those things play together and how one informs the other. And it's like watching this amazing engine just chug along and work. Like we're all in this Flintstones car pedaling along together. It's pretty cool. I love seeing that and how each different system brings something different to the table and informs different groups and what they're doing.
Can you give me 2 examples of systems that are like that so we can have a kind of a comparison and a contrast?
Ooh.
What is system X giving you that system Y isn't, and vice versa?
Yeah. Okay. So we were talking a little bit about Blades in the Dark and other Forged in the Dark games before we jumped into the call. And one of the things that I think has been brought up in previous discussions are downtime activities. And one of the things that's really interesting about them, right, is that they are like little containers that we fill with things. Like, here's the thing that you can do, here's the shape of it, now fill it up with something of this general shape. And so it has this really interesting supportive structure where it says, hey, here's something that you can come to the table with, and now bring your additional stuff that you would like to experience or express or share with the players at the table. So it's this really interesting supportive structure. As opposed to something like Wanderhome, where we have maybe a few guidelines of how about we go try this, or how about that, or what do you think about this, which sends us in a very different direction, a lot more freeform.
Would you say a few words about what Wanderhome is for anyone who's not familiar?
Yeah, Wanderhome is this amazing game designed by Jay Dragon and the people at Possum Creek. I believe I got that right. And it's a belonging outside belonging game, which uses a series of token economy to kind of help drive play, but sometimes that kind of gets pushed to the wayside. Sorry. You play as these animal folk in a generally pastoral setting, but it's set in the aftermath of a great and devastating war. It has this play that comes about of you making these, what sometimes feels like very loose, very flowy, gentle connections with other characters. But then there's this underlying current of these really hard things that all of the characters have gone through and have experienced from one side of the war or the other.
You know, having never played that game before, I have always looked at it and thought, this looks like Redwall, the game, to me, the great series of Brian Jacques children's books. But I remember thinking, but in Redwall, they go to war and they like do stuff. They fight the rats and the snakes and things. Mm-hmm. And now you're saying to me that in Wanderhome, there's been a war. So maybe I was on the money the whole time.
No, but the war is over. Yeah.
Right.
The war is over. Right. Yeah.
One of the rules is that there is no longer violence in the Haith.
I think one thing that comes up for me in that comparison between those two systems you were talking about, Danny, about in the Forged in the Dark games, the downtime, having a structure that then you can fill with things. And that structure for me is very instrumental. It's a thing that you're going to do in the world, an action that you're going to take with a purpose to achieve something. And then you can fill it. When you were talking about filling it, I was thinking about how I approach downtimes in that game. And I try to fill it with all this character stuff and character interactions and let the instrumental goal of the scene be just kind of the starting premise for what we're doing. But it's not the focus of what I'm up to when I'm in one of those downtime actions. And then I think of Forged in the Dark in general, has missions or I forget jobs, or I can't remember the terms that they used for them, but they're all very instrumental. And so I think you see that pattern replicated, and then me also trying to fill in each of those with as much character and thematic work that I can. Right. And then when I think of Wanderhome, it's such a different kind of setting, right? Not setting. It's the game's asking you something very different. It's not setting up instrumental goals at all for you. There are no instrumental goals, really. You're wandering. There's nothing in particular you're doing. And I can see where that would be a challenge for some people who are used to playing within structures that are very instrumental or mission-driven, let's call it that, or party-driven. There's a kind of pace. I remember the first time I played Wanderhome, the one thing that really came to me was how relaxed I felt in the game throughout the entire game. I've never felt like there was stress. I never felt like I had to push myself or even have to push my character. There were some times that we were thinking about, or processing these kinds of, the war had taken place, the kinds of impacts it had had on us. But it was at such a leisurely pace that it didn't feel oppressive or hurrying. And there was something about that was very special when I was thinking about it in terms of other games. So yeah, it's an interesting contrast to think about from a player experience as interfacing with, a gaming system. And what's the game asking you, and what's it allowing you or giving you permission to do, or encouraging you even to do, right?
It's funny that you should say that, Jose, and you, Danny, because the poison that I'm bringing this week is the exact opposite of that.
Wonderful.
I recently have been lucky enough to play in an off the hearth, away from hearth, a game that I had never heard of before called Grim Wild, which is, I guess, a game that is meant to take some of the heroic fantasy tropes that we associate with a game like Dungeons and Dragons and give it a bit more of a cinematic twist. And in this game, all different kinds of things are tracked over time in the way that a Blades in the Dark might use something like a clock. In Grimwild, they have these pools of dice that are rolled whenever something is triggered, right? And it could be, we're starting a new turn in the dungeon. We're going to roll our pool of dice to represent our torch. And then every dice that falls below a certain result gets taken out of the pool and the pool shrinks. And when the pool is gone, something happens. In this case, the torch goes out. And there's something to me that is just so electrifying about the possibility that all 8 dice could vanish right now. And so you guys are talking about like having a nice time over here, meandering. And for me, I am just like on the knife edge of what if all 8 dice come up as a 1 and we're in the dark. And I just find it to be so... It's riveting to me. It's riveting. And the GM is being great about it because the GM is rolling all these dice in the open. There's no sleight of hand or anything. So when something like that happens, or, when you get down to 1 dice in the pool and 5 times in a row you roll high enough and it's just the little dice that could, the little D6 that could. There's something that is just so electrifying to me about the prospect of there being disaster just like an inch away. So I'm not really sure how to reconcile those two things yet.
Have you had a moment like that where like suddenly all of the dice are gone and things have just completely turned sideways on you?
Yes, there was a fire on an airship that got out of hand way faster than any of us were intending. Well, we made a lot more of that trip on foot than I think we had really prepared for. But yeah, it was great because I think everybody at the table, GM included, got to kind of look at each other and say, "Okay, we're walking through the swamp now." So guess that's what the session is going to be about. What's doing it for you these days, Jose?
Good question. Where am I these days with my games and my gaming experience? I think one of the things that has been on my radar just recently, and this is in a game that I'm playing with you, Ian, transitioning from an Apocalypse Keys game that we were playing, and then we decided to create a new game with some of the same cohort of players, in a continuity of some kind of a loose continuity, but for instance, we were playing within the setting of a kind of urban fantasy version of New York, and we're going to continue in that. And so that transition, I don't think I've ever done this before, actually, in games, in 2 games, where we're moving into a new... Well, no, that's not true. I have done it. But there's something about it right now. Like, for instance, I decided just in the past couple of days, I decided that in this new game, I'm going to play an NPC from the previous game. and that's going to be, and it's like a spin-off kind of quality, right? There's a spin-off about this, very minor character who barely had, any lines in the first series, and now I'm gonna play him in the next series. So
the casting director is just like, I just like that guy's face.
Let's keep
Get
going
him back
with
on set.
Bring him back on. Let's give him a little bit more airtime. So anyways, there's something really fun about that. There's kind of a zoom in, zoom out kind of quality. This is a character that was kind of on the periphery. I think I actually created this NPC at some point in the game. But and he was not all filled out in any way, shape, or form. He was more kind of just a victim, really, to some extent, that I was working with, that I could victimize with things. But now I get to play him as a character who's coming back from a sojourn in some kind of unreal alternative dimension, and has been impacted by that. And there's something really cool about that. I'm feeling really jazzed about it. I'm feeling excited about it. There's a lot of curiosity that I have about bringing this person out from this character out from the background into the foreground and seeing what he looks like when he's in focus there. So that's feeling exciting to me right now, because I don't think I've ever done anything quite like that in a game before. So I wonder if we should tap into our topic. It's so big, it's hard to tap into it. Should we start by talking about what we even mean by developing as a player? What comes up? I mean, obviously it won't be exhaustive, but like Danny, when you first think about what it means to develop as a player, what's something that comes up for you around that?
Yeah, I think a thing that that helps me focus maybe are like, what are the tools that I can create for myself or I see out there that I can try to put into practice that helps me approach a game in a way that I guess I feel better about it and the people at the table might, have more engagement with it. It's so hard to describe. How about the two of you?
I mean, I think to a certain extent there's a comparison to be made to like an ecological niche, because every table is going to be different, and what it means to be well adapted to any given table is going to be different from situation to situation. If the game that you're playing is you're sitting around and you've got your beer and your pretzels, and you're here mostly to kind of blow off steam and roll some dice after a long week, I actually think it can be kind of working at cross purposes, to bring back this idea of like a reward cycle that we mentioned in a previous episode. It can be working at cross purposes to try to bring in something more theoretical or something to that environment, because what success means in that situation is for all of us to laugh and for there to be some spills. Then maybe you get to like level up at the end of the session. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, if what you're trying to do is to sort of fill the Haith with evocative detail and sort of these like almost ambiguous character moments, sorry for the turn of phrase, it's just a completely different animal from that first situation. And so I think it's not a very helpful answer, I guess, but I think that it depends entirely on your circumstances.
So one of the things I'm hearing and what the two of you are talking about is this theme of adaptability, and how adaptive can we be to particular tables or games or settings that we come to, or particular moments even with a group. Might be the same game with the same group on a different night, and something new is called for. And so when I think about my own journey as a player, I think I have become more adaptable. I hope I've become more adaptable. That doesn't mean that at times I don't have my particular play style or the kinds of things that I'm interested. I have the character, I have my approach, but that approach is not, I hope I'm not holding it so rigidly that it feels like it's overwhelming what the moment might need. So maybe for me, there is a question of, and that's connected to listening and to being aware of what's happening at the table, and also being reflective of my own practice, being able to stop and think, maybe after a game, and stop and think, well, so what happened in that game? How was I? How were my fellow players? I'm savoring kind of the experience and trying to taste all the different nuances of the experience to try to really honor it, and then see if some kind of, dare I say, learning comes from that, or development, or something new comes from that, so that when I come to the table again, something new can emerge from me. So it's kind of this back and forth between finding out what's my poison, like we say on this podcast, but also letting that kind of morph in response to what's going on. Because I was going to say, for me, one thing that's been a part of my development is being more upfront with my particular wants or desires, either saying them directly within certain contexts, like when we're in a session 0 or things like that, or even in a regular session. And sometimes just telegraphing them more indirectly by the way I choose to set up scenes, or, for instance, what I do in a downtime during a Blaze in the Dark game. So, Danny, you and I have been in a Forged in the Dark game together, right? Mm-hmm. And Girl by Moonlight, right? And
yep.
I would think, and maybe I need a reality check from you on that somehow I was telegraphing that in one of those downtime actions, I'm not interested so much in the outcome or in the instrumental goal, but I'm interested in finding some really cool character moments between us. Hopefully I'm being able to, communicate that. And that's kind of one side of the equation, whereas the other side of the equation is how can I adapt to what Danny's wanting from a particular downtime scene, or what the group as a whole wants for downtime to be like. How can I listen for that and be nimble enough to step into what's needed,
Would you say that it has taken you some time to arrive at those preferences, or do you think that you have had to kind of build up some confidence to be able to state them so clearly? Like, has there been a time where you don't feel you've been able to express yourself in that way?
Yeah, and I want to hear what other people's experience of this is, but sometimes I had, particularly when I first started gaming, a much more passive kind of, okay, I just have to, the word conform comes up, conform to what's possible at this table, and I just have to do what do these folks want? What does this game want? And what I wanted was less a part of my equation, or I didn't know I didn't know what it was actually. And part of the journey for me, maybe in development, has been figuring out what it is that I really want. What about you, Danny?
I want to first check in and give you that reality check you asked for, Jose.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. You were absolutely amazing. That is one huge learning experience that I took away from that particular series. I was watching you express those things that you wanted to see out of a scene, or you wanted your character to experience, and I was just like, oh my God, you can just say these things out loud? Which seems maybe kind of silly, but because of course you can, but I don't know, sometimes you just don't have the language for it. You just don't know that that's a thing until you see it. And right. So that was a wonderful...
The veins on your forehead are standing out, trying to will that thought telepathically into your scene partner.
Yeah, I appreciated it so much. And it was a gift that you gave to me, maybe without knowing. It was like, this was really a great learning experience. So yeah, you're doing a great job.
It's coming through. It's coming through. Okay, good.
Yeah. In a really great way too. It's like, okay, cool. We have this direction to head in together. I learned a lot about this idea of playing to lift, where you go in and one of your self-assigned objectives as a player, right, is to go in and to help other players to realize their characters and to support their characters and to bring them into the spotlight. And ever since I learned about this, like, this is a really cool thing. And I've been, I've asked places here and there, people here and there, like, how do you go about doing that? What are some great techniques to put you in that kind of frame of mind? What are some things you can, actually do at the table? People had great advice, but it doesn't always connect, when rubber hits the road. And then in a past session or two, things just suddenly clicked into place of this thing that I've been trying to do. And I was like, aha, I see this moment. It does, like, my character is just a vehicle for me to come in here and grab your character and literally like lift them up and like, let's explore this thing that you're talking about, because I'm so interested in it and I want to hear more about what you have to say about it.
Something that was coming up for me while I was going through this document prior to us starting, that what you just said, Danny, really kind of activated for me is recently we had a wonderful conversation with Willora about playing to fail. And that episode was all about doing that on purpose, and even making that kind of a primary goal of play. But something that I have been reflecting on since that conversation is that the practice of playing to fail has an instrumental value also, in that eventually in a tabletop game with stakes and randomization and dice and stuff, failure is going to come your way. And so being able to welcome it as a friend and move through it and be able to turn it into sort of a springboard for what happens next in the story. Not to necessarily like dwell in that space like what we were talking about with Willora, but just to kind of say like, here are the punches that I get to roll with, right? And watch how neat of a cartwheel I can turn. The idea of playing to lift, you're not always doing it. Sometimes you get to be in the spotlight, but being able to establish that as like one of the paints in your palette that you can call on when is necessary is so cool. And I definitely think for me, I have felt my range as a player growing when I look down and I think I have all of these colors that I can paint with here. I can't, I know how to play to fail when the situation calls for it. I know how to play to lift when somebody else requires that happen. So yeah, I mean, that goes back to what you're saying, Jose, about adaptability.
Yeah, and I think it's also connected to when we talked to Karen Twells about, making offers and accepting offers, listening for offers from my fellow players. I was thinking about a moment, I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but a moment I was in a game of Urban Shadows. The game doesn't really matter. What mattered for this moment was one of my fellow players introduced a daughter for his PC that he had kind of a conflictual relationship with, I believe. And then it was my turn to do some kind of a scene, and I just decided that daughter shows up at my tattoo parlor and wants a crazy tattoo, crazy magical tattoo that's not good for her, I believe is what it was. And I did it because I wanted to grab on, because I felt like the other player had, by creating this daughter, this NPC, was making an offer, and I wanted to I didn't know where it was going to go, but I just wanted to hook into that. And I don't know, playing to lift seems so lofty. I love the term. But what I did there was just, I was trying to hook them in. I was trying to create a little bit of drama between our characters. But in the process, by grabbing that offer, or interpreting it as an offer and responding to it, what I remember is that other player seemed very, very thankful that I had done that. And actually, not just thankful, themed surprised and like a little blown away that now he had all this other stuff to work with. And so there's some delight. That's what I experienced in him, in the player, that, oh, yay, now we get to do this. And so that felt like, oh, I did something right there. I responded somehow to what someone else was putting down in a way that wasn't at cross purposes or even ignoring the development of my own characters, because it added complexity to my character as well. It's not a zero-sum game, right?
You were affirming their reality by doing that. There's a proposition that is being put forward.
Right.
I've got this side character, and you are like seconding the motion.
I don't know how often I do that, because part of what our discussion, I think, is like, how do we cultivate those capacities too? how do we encourage our own development as players, right? Regardless of, depending on what we're looking to do, you know.
This idea that you were bringing up earlier, Ian, of like a particular game and a particular group, there's something that's being asked of you when engaging with them, just based on the context of like, this is what the game's about, this is what the group is interested in. And those feel like great points, like guideposts to think about when you, like you were saying, Jose, when you step away from a table once the session's done and you're reflecting upon the experience, you know, what are the things that I enjoyed there, and what are these things that, I know my understanding is that we're aiming for. Are the things that I did they help us get there better? If they didn't, did they take us in another direction that we all found enjoyable? You know, what are those concrete things that I did? And if they went in a different direction, if my choices took us in a different direction, how do I feel about that? If it's something that, I think I would have preferred to make another choice and to head into the direction that I think, or my understanding is that the system and the group is asking, what were those alternative choices that I could have made and can try next time?
Well, yeah, you bring up an important point here, Danny, which is that I do think that on basis, someone who is designing a game or a system or an iteration of that system probably has spent more time considering edge cases and what the system is designed to, meant to produce than the average person who is sitting down to play the game. And if you listening out there in podcast land are not a member of an esteemed community like the Open Hearth Gaming Community, we'll put the sign up info in our show notes if that's something you're interested in. It could be that the people that you are sitting down to play with are not so critically engaged with the game. And that's fine, because we all have lives and maybe we have kids to take care of, or we have other hobbies. I do think that one of the most important steps that you can take as far as a tangible impact on the table is to spend a little bit of time just trying to understand what the game is asking of you in terms of like getting to know your character sheet, getting to know like how dice work, like that kind of thing, knowing how to navigate the beat by beat of whatever game it is that you're playing. There's just some kind of musical part of my brain that is like counting time, counting beats. And every beat that we're spending looking up a specific, how to do grappling is time that we could otherwise be spending talking to each other, and having that kind of fictional resonance between player characters. Having a degree of system mastery, I think, is so important just for being able to move through the parts of the game that otherwise would be sticking points.
So what comes up for me around that is a little bit of devil's advocate. I'm not sure if it's devil's advocate or if it's... I just want to talk about a specific instance since Danny's here at the table. And that is that Girl by Moonlight game that I was in with you, Danny. I was vexed by that system, deeply vexed by that system. And I was transparent about it at the beginning. And then we were using this addendum to Blades in the Dark called Deep Cuts, which just, it was vexed squared for me. And it just was, it was really hard to wrap my mind around it.
Downright stymied.
And so, but my experience at the table was that you, Danny, and the other players at the table, and the GM at the table, Clarice and Fumi and Dom, they were so gracious and generous with helping me through the mechanics that I felt like I could play and have a really good time and do the kinds of things I wanted to do, even with the uncomfortable crunchiness at times that I experienced with the system. And it ended up being the game that I chose for my game of the year. But anyways, all that to say that even though I could not claim system mastery, familiarity might even be a strong word for what I had for that game. And this was a long run. This was a quarterly, I believe. I had a great time, and I felt like my character got to sing, and we created a great story that was really memorable for me in spite of my lack of mastery. So I don't know if there's any lesson or that's just an outlier, but I just wanted to put it out there because I'm staring at Danny here and I can remember that experience and what it was like, and not having the mastery, but having the support. Maybe that's the key, the support of my fellow players, which I asked for directly at the very beginning of the run, and everyone, jumped in. So
allow me to be a little sappy about my co-host. Sorry, Danny. This might be a little. You're sort of the third wheel in this situation.
I'm in for the ride. Let's go.
Jose, you are just such a rare. You're a rare beast, really. There is a lyrical quality to you that is just overflowing at all times. You're like looking at a fucking stained glass window, man, where like the narrative is passing through you with nary a hindrance. And not only that, but you are lending it this kind of extra pathos all the time. And it just seems to be happening naturally. I don't think that is a common quality for people to have, nor do I think that not having that quality makes you any more or less or anything of a gamer. I think that having that degree of system mastery is important for someone who maybe needs the system itself to prompt motion. Because I think a lot of the games that we like to play at the Open Hearth do have things built into them that are going to be kind of poking and prodding the player along to the point or points which you seem to be laser guided onto just from your own sensibilities. You're already going for the story moments. You don't necessarily need the system to be shooing you and hurrying you along to get to that point. And there was system fluency at that table, right?
There was definitely. And thank God, because you're right. If there had been no system fluency, if they'd all been me, then it wouldn't have been a pretty picture at all. It probably wouldn't have been that game. It wouldn't have happened that way. Yeah.
But fortunately, you were able to do exactly what you do best with no complications. Well, I don't know about no complications. There were probably some missed rolls in there.
Well, there were complications, yes. Thank you for those kind words, Ian. That's really sweet of you to say. The other thing that comes up for me around this question of development as a player or practice as a player is, when I'm not playing these games, I'm a university professor, for those of you who don't know it. And so I think about education a lot. And one of the things in terms of facilitating learning is there has to be a feedback cycle of some sort. It's one thing for me to finish a game like I was talking about and then reflect myself upon the experience. But even in this moment, like having you here, Danny, allows me to get a kind of feedback from you that I actually didn't get when I was in the game. The reality check that you gave me, for instance, about whether how I was dealing with scenes or communicating my intent. There was no opportunity in that whole run for me to get that kind of feedback. And so now in this moment, you're here and I'm staring at you. I was like, oh, let me ask Danny. But I'm wondering if there's a way. We have stars and wishes, right? I don't know. It's like there's some other way. Is there some other thing that we could do around receiving feedback from our fellow players to help us develop, to get a reality check on if what we're doing is actually landing the way we think it's doing, or we're just in our own heads around it all. So it's nice to have this conversation with you all, because I've been at the table with both of you.
I think part of that too is being bold enough to answer, and there is this trust that I feel from having played with you and knowing that I could say my what I was receiving on my end, and that it would be received and that I don't have to worry about that component necessarily. Like there was some discussion recently on the Open Hearth Discord about what would a facilitator or player camp 2.0 look like, where people want to continue improving their craft and they would like feedback. Is that something that needs to be guided by somebody that has more experience, or is that something that can be more round table and, everybody's giving each other, really solid feedback, and you enter into that framework knowing that that's part of the expectation. I'm not sure in how I have experienced Stars and Wishes that is all that fruitful in that respect for me personally. Because Stars and Wishes is very confusing to me as to whether it's, are we here to lift each other up and make each other, celebrate the thing that we did, which I love, or is this like a soft-handed critique, which I'm only interested in participating in if the other person has asked for that or wants that. I don't want to come to the table. Just throwing that out there because I don't feel like that's my place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking about creative writing circles or something where everyone's writing something and then and they're workshopping together, right? And so we all have an agreement, if we're in a circle like that we're going to bring forward our babies and folks are going to give us hopefully constructive feedback in some way. I don't think that has to not include things like stars. I could say, that was really cool what you did, because I have received stars or listened to stars that have allowed me to learn something. Like I didn't even know that I'd done something and someone started and it was like, oh, wow, okay. I should pay more attention to that thing. I didn't even know that was important. Or people were interested in it. But I think I totally hear you, Danny, when you're saying that, we do not have a norm or an agreement that we are going into these games with the attitude of workshopping our creative process together. We're collaborating in our creative process, but there isn't a venue or an avenue, that's the word I'm looking for, an avenue for constructive feedback, for instance. It'd be interesting to have a game, because I think you're right, that you'd have to have an explicit agreement, I think, that we were going to do something like that. Unless, okay, now I'm like backpedaling. Unless I think about back channel kinds of conversations that I've had with other players in a game. Like, for instance, if I did something that I thought, she made a funny face when I did that. Let me email her and say, hey, was that okay? Did something happen? I just want to check in. And then I start a conversation in the back channel, between sessions or whatever, about that. Those can be really, really helpful for me in terms of feedback, because people, obviously they don't have to engage in that kind of feedback, but when you reach outside of the game for them, that is a possibility. So those have been learning moments for me, and it's made me feel more connected with my fellow players. We can open up the black box of what our play a little bit more and look at it, reflect together. That's what it is. It's an invitation to reflect together. So we've talked about this thing about reflecting, right? Yes. This is an invitation to reflect together. How do we create invitations or opportunities or spaces where we can reflect together on our gaming process?
Look at this interesting thing that happened. What do you think about this?
Yeah, what do you make of that? Yeah, what do you make of that?
That's really good framing.
Yeah. How did that happen? I don't even know how it happened. Because I tend to do it, I'm realizing now, I tend to do that reaching out in the back channel when there's some problem, right? But I could reach out when something really cool happened that I don't understand, that I want to talk more about. And I don't think of doing that. But that sounds like a really fun thing to do, actually. And maybe I'll put it on my list of to-dos for next year. Reach out when something really cool happens to reflect a little bit more deeply on what that cool thing was. Yeah.
If you're like us and you play games at the Open Hearth, often we don't have the time to develop rapport with our fellow players that you might assume you need in order to be able to have these kind of difficult conversations. Of course, on the flip side of that, you kind of can't afford to wait to develop rapport. If there's something that you want to see happen at the table, you kind of have to make it happen. Wherever you are listening to this, if you are Open Hearth stalwart, or you are at the kitchen table and you're playing, let's say, 13th Age or GURPS, think about what kind of feedback you would want to receive. Feedback is an offer in its own way, I think. Mm-hmm. Now, Danny, usually we like to close the show with a little bit of actionable advice for our dear listener, our gentle listener. And today you have brought with you such a wealth of information. For the price of a pearl, listener, you'll be getting a goddamn Pink Panther diamond because Danny has brought with him a multi-step process for how to go about doing this kind of improvement in a sort of systematic way. Is this something that you'd like to talk about, Danny?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. This comes largely from thinking about what has worked for me in the past in preparation for talking to you two. And some of them are things that I would like to do more of because they've been fruitful in the past and I've let that slide, and I would like to improve. The 4-step process for improvement that I have written down here. Step 1 is to play, and part of play is to experiment, to put yourself out there and to try new things. So that way you can see what works and what doesn't work. As painful as it might be in the moment for things not to work, there's a big learning opportunity there. That I don't think should go to waste. And what is it they say, that you're in a flow state and you're really improving when you're pushing up against your capabilities, what you feel comfortable doing. You're pushing past that just a little bit into an area of discomfort. So that might be a fruitful thing to think about.
I have this image of a surfer. If your comfort zone is the crest of a wave, the surfer is always just a little bit ahead of the crest. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Step 2 is to observe, which is just to, once a session is over, maybe even the middle of a session, to step back and just to reflect on what happened. What are some of the things you did? What are some of the things that other people did? What are the things that happened in the session? Just to gather data, just gather information, not judge, not consider, this led to this thing. Just take it all in, write it all down. Whether that's through a process of journaling or discussing with fellow players or going on a long walk and just thinking about it, just taking all of that information in.
This is what you were saying before, Jose. You said that you were savoring the experience.
Step 3 is where we start to dissect that information. We have it splayed out on the table and we're picking it apart and seeing, what were maybe some areas of causality, like what choice did we make? Where do we think that, impact that had in the play? And to think about how our choices led to one thing or led to another. Like we were talking about earlier about what is being asked of us, what are we bringing to the table, how are those things gelling or not gelling? And that largely leads into step 4, which is plan. Basically plan for your experimentation. Well, if I did this and I think this is what it meant, or this is what I think happened, consider what alternative choices might have been and where that could potentially lead in play. Like I am playing with this particular player or that particular player, and I know they really like this thing, and I really would like my character to spend time with their character because I think that would be a really interesting opportunity to experience. So let me try to think of choices that I can make in play next time that will, help bring that about. So we're really looking for, concrete things that you can trial during play in step 4, that you can, make notes of, have a plan for. I've definitely found it to be very fruitful to write down an index card of a few bullet points of things that I'm aiming for in a particular session, so that I don't forget them and that I can learn from them.
Planning, not just the province of the GM any longer.
I have a plan. You've got a plan. I have part of a plan. What percentage?
I don't know, 12%.
12%?
I was thinking about when you were talking about planning, and I was thinking about it in the context of playing to lift that we were talking about earlier. You know, sometimes I will, when I'm preparing for, and I do prepare for play sessions. Yeah. So I know that's not, not everybody does, but when I am preparing for a session, I'll write the names of the other PCs, and I will think, what do I know that this person is interested? I might look at the wish list if the wish list is up somewhere. That can be helpful. But what do I know, or what do I sense, or what do I intuit about what this player wants for their PC? And what's some small thing that I could do that would engage with something that they want? And I think that's, it doesn't have to be even really fleshed out at all, but just taking that moment to think about, what do I think Danny wants from his PC? Or what do I think Ian wants from his PC? What would really make them smile or make them really be jazzed? And is there anything I can do from my seat as a player to invite that or to support that? I think that's a few minutes really well spent and really generously spent. I like the 4 stages.
It's the experimental method just applied to tabletop role-playing games.
Scientific method. But no control groups.
Alas.
Alas, no control group. The naturalistic observation.
I know we're running short on time, so if this doesn't get included, that's fine. But there's a question here that I really love to pick the two of your brains about.
Sure.
There's this: how do you recover after realizing you played a scene badly? So I would love to hear how the two of you approach that, but also in an addendum to that, or maybe even as a first question, what does it mean to you to play a scene badly? What is that?
I think it's worth saying in the moment, hey, that sucked of me to do. I think it's important to just like reflect and to validate, to affirm the reality that I just messed up or stepped on your foot. I think the first and most important thing to do is to just make an honest apology. If it's something that, caused a consternation in a fellow player. It's only from there, I think, that you can like really move forward. You have to acknowledge like, hey, there's the problem, and now we can move ahead knowing that has been addressed properly.
I also think this idea of badly, a scene that went badly, doesn't always refer to a scene where someone made a mistake or an apology is required, or sometimes I'm just thinking about like, scenes that fall flat, that never come up to speed. And I think we talked with Karen Twells about this a little bit, but how to end a scene. And I think about that, like, okay, if a scene is not going anywhere and it's taking up too much time, sometimes I'll just call it and just put it to bed and say, okay, I think we can move on. Because sometimes the magic doesn't happen. And it's no one's fault necessarily. There could be, a moment of reflection there at some point in some context. But like, why didn't it ignite, or why didn't it, do its thing? But sometimes what's the right metaphor? Do you pull the cord on the chute or something? Whatever. Or throw the towel in, maybe. I don't know. There's so many different idioms for these things, right?
You hit the eject.
Hit the eject button.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, let's cut our losses here. And not because there was anything bad that happened. But I guess I'm curious also about scenes that went badly, to use that phrase, that have the potential for teaching us something, or that have the potential for us learning something from it. And that's a big category to talk about in the abstract. But I don't know if anything comes up for either of you where you felt like something happened that was a little off or non-optimal, let's call it that, and but you actually learned something interesting or important or significant from that experience.
Something that happened actually like pretty much right at about the same time that you and I were playing Heart the City Beneath. I got the idea to run the game for you guys because I was already running it for a home group. I remember a scene with one of the player characters where it just became clear that this player was not on board with what the game was about. Like, they had gotten all the way through session 0 and several sessions deep into the campaign before they were like, wait a minute.
Wait a minute. Who are you?
I've been sold a bill of goods here. And in this case, the bill of goods was like existential questions about death and what it means, for the spirit to go on afterwards. And, and this player was just like, I'm not really here for that. It turned into a way bigger issue than it really had to be. I learned a lot about just like how to kind of manage discord, how to manage like people being at cross purposes or cross emotions. But another thing that it did was it was just kind of like a sharpening experience of like, no, really what I do want to have those kinds of experiences. I don't want to play Heart the City Beneath as just a kind of gory Evil Dead movie with dice. I do want to use this kind of ham-fisted instrument to explore some of these more, existential questions. So in a way it was sort of similar to what you were talking about before, Jose, about like, it has taken you some time to arrive at the conclusion of what it is that you like and what you don't like. Besides anything else, and anytime you have a moment like that where you're like, man, that was not what it could have been, there is the promise in there. There's the kernel. You're acknowledging that there is a could have been there. Mm-hmm. Any could have been also sort of implies a could be.
Optimistic.
What do you think, Danny?
Like, I've definitely been in scenes where, like, I think a lot of it for me, definitely, like we were talking about earlier about making and accepting offers. There have been times where I've recognized an offer as being placed before me, and I came to the table with a certain idea, and I'll reject that offer, and I always feel awful after that. And it ruins, like, I kill the mood for myself, and like it takes me a while to re-engage with the game. And then every single time I'm like, that would have been so much more interesting had I just ran with what was offered, and it would have been something exciting, something I didn't know where we were going, rather than whatever creative vision I showed up to the table with. So that's been a learning experience for me. As to what to do about that in the moment, so the advice that the two of you have given, I think, have been excellent. Is if it's something that we can go back and fix, then we can go back and change that. Otherwise, it's something that I can reflect upon and do better at next time.
Do you feel, Danny, that there's any outstanding issue that has not been addressed yet? Have you gotten everything that you want out of this conversation?
Well, we started off the conversation saying that we were no way, shape, or form are we going to cover all of this. So the answer is no, Ian. The answer is no. But yeah. I guess it'll be what it has to be.
Yeah, well, you're never going to eat all the food at the buffet, no matter how much you would want to.
Yeah.
And I very much hope that we get to be at a table again soon, Danny.
Mm-hmm.
I hope the scheduling gods and the calendaring gods work in our favor, and we get to play again.
We hope so.
It would be fun.
Danny, is there anything that you would like to plug? Your own thing that you're involved with, perhaps, but it could also just be like, hey, I went to see this movie the other day.
My brain is drawing a blank. I've been dabbling in game design, so there's something that I'm working on that I've been able to play test with some people, which has been exciting. Some members of the Open Hearth community, which were wonderful. They were so gracious to offer to give me their time, which is so great. And it was a wonderful experience. And I've play tested it multiple times outside of But that's something that I hope to do more of in the future. There's nothing really out there right now because it's all kept so close while it's still forming.
Just stating.
A plug as a promised for the future.
Yes.
a plug that was and is yet to be.
Always leave them asking for more.
That's right. Thanks for listening to A Different Kind of Hex. And a big thank you to Danny for coming on and schooling us. I'll definitely be using that 4-step method in my future games. Play, observe, analyze, prepare, rinse and repeat. By the time you're listening to this, Open Hearth Gaming's annual May the 4th mini convention will be jumping to hyperspace in just 2 or 3 weeks. A whole weekend of Star Wars themed games, Tachyon Squadron, Brothers in Arms, Once More Into the Void, just to name a few, and I'll be running Gravity Rip for some pod racing action. See you on the track, Sleemo. You can find Open Hearth Gaming at openhearthgaming.com or on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Tumblr at Open Hearth Gaming. You can find José and I at adifferenthex@gmail.com, which we would love to hear your anecdotes from your own play, or if you'd like to come onto the show as a guest, please reach out to us. You can find the show music at lloydeves.bandcamp.com, with assist this week from Thomas Dalby and Sailor Moon's Takanori Arasawa. Keep playing, listener. We'll catch you in the next one.